Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum.
Welcome back, y'all, to another episode of the Red Text Podcast. I'm your co-host, Rai, aka the Mestizo Mystic on Instagram.
And my name is Voga. I am Voga Lumicente on Instagram, and I have no nails on today, but that's not important. Ride, can you tell everyone what is important?
I don't know. The stubs are distracting me just a little bit.
Oh my god, don't call them stubs. How dare you?
We have a very special guest today. We have Marshall, the Witch of Southern Light, joining us today, and I'm so excited to have. Or what are your pronouns, Marshall?
He, him is just fine.
Oh, thank you. And we're so excited to have him here with us today.
Thank you for having me here today. I'm really happy to be here. I'm a longtime listener. We've had you on our show, so I'm really excited. This has been a treat to look forward to.
Oh, that's really sweet. Well, okay, listen. I this is gonna be a big Voga basically gassing Marshall up this entire episode because I have been a follower, a fan, a listener, a consumer of Marshall, both Marshall and Austin. Austin and I, we gab back and forth, but Marshall, I have been consuming your content for the better part of however long you've been online. Was it 3 years, something like that? Even more?
About now, yeah.
Yeah. I first found you on TikTok, and I was like, who is this person? And I was immediately obsessed. And the amount of content that you create is unparalleled to a lot of people. It's a lot of content. And realized that you produce a podcast with Austin, started listening to the podcast Southern Bramble, which is absolutely incredible. A lot of the things that y'all talked about on Southern Bramble were very formative things that I incorporate into my own practice. So now that I have you face to face on our podcast, I just want to say thank you very much, and an absolute just gratitude for the content that you create, both on your own, but also with the podcast that you produce, which is Southern Bramble with Austin Fuller, who is Bane X Bramble. The things that y'all contribute to this community is extremely impactful. So as podcast hosts ourselves, we know the impact that a podcast can have, and I just wanted to express my gratitude for the impact that your podcast has had on me.
Well, thank you. Oh my gosh, that's feels like I'm so honored to have that impact on anyone, let alone someone who I also admire so much. My Nana, this is silly. My Nana actually messaged me because she was trying to ask for help to order my book on Amazon. And it was this, I love explaining things. I will literally screen record things on my phone and send them to my Nana so she will know how to replicate the steps to get there. I love her so much. And
That's really sweet.
She was like, I just saw your bio on Amazon, Marshall. And I was like, oh yeah? And she literally wrote it back to me. She was like, runs a podcast, writes a column, published author. And I said, yeah, all that. And I didn't even put my full-time job. And she was she was like, you've been a busy boy. And I was like, yes, I'm so busy.
Oh, your Nana sounds so sweet.
She is the matriarch. Absolutely. If you've ever seen Downton Abbey, she is a southern version of the Dowager Countess. She is absolutely the Maggie Smith of my family. I love her.
I was about to say.
Yes, I love her so much. She's so witty. I could go on forever about stories about my Nana. She's great.
Oh no, I can go on and on about my Lola because she is the light of my life. I swear. She is a big influence on my practice too, because she's kind of the one who introduced me to Mary. But anyways, before we get it on, we're just gushing over each other. Listen,
Gabbing.
yeah, we're just gabbing. First, Marshall, how are you?
You know, I'm doing good. So I am 2 weeks into publishing my book, right? I'm a self-published author. I've spent the better part of a year putting this together in my free time, my spare time. Um, I have kind of been on this weird roller coaster of emotions about this work. Um, I don't have a marketing director. I don't have a professional editor. I don't have a publishing house telling me whether or not the content that I'm putting out there is something that's, one, sellable, two, something people want to read, three, something that doesn't come across as amateur. So I felt I've had this roller coaster ride of feeling elation and pride, but also feeling really, really vulnerable. And I remember having a conversation with Olivia, I want to say about a month before the book came out. And I remember just kind of talking about, like, what if people read this and, like, the response is, this is such amateur writing, or it's so obvious that this is not a writer. And, like, I'm one of those people that, yes, I read all the Twilight books when I wasn't even a teenager. Oh my gosh, my biggest fear, and I was expressing this to Olivia, was that my book would be read as very amateur or first time writer, or he's not an author. And I remember being I was a little older than a teenager, I have to be honest. When I read the Twilight books, I enjoyed the story, and it wasn't until much later that, like, a lot of criticism was coming in about writing style, about all these different things that I never noticed, and that was flooding my mind again. And I was just kind of like, oh geez, do I think I'm creating something that I really, really love, or that's very, very moving, and I'm just gonna put it out in the world only to have it be kind of pointed at that? and I was just really, really nervous about that. But at the same time, since doing so, I have had so many really, really kind people reach out, sharing private reviews, just whether partially through it, or leaving reviews on Instagram, on their pages, on Amazon. I have just been so moved by the way in which people have been reaching out to say kind things to me about it. So I feel like I'm on the end of that roller coaster. It doesn't feel like a roller coaster anymore. So
Good.
I'm in a much better place now, and I'm really, really happy with how it's being received.
That's wonderful. I'm happy to hear it. Here's the thing. As a fellow artist, something that is always going to happen when you are creating your art is that you are always terrified of being scrutinized. That is something that you are always going to have to deal with. And putting something that is so personal and so and we're going to go into the book.
Yeah.
Promise, we're going to go into the book. Listen, dear listeners, don't worry, we're going to talk about this book because I cannot talk about this book enough. But when you put yourself out there, especially presenting yourself as a work of art, like a book or a painting or a poem or a podcast or being a content creator online, you know, your Instagram feed is a work of art. You are going to be terrified. You are going to be scrutinized. The reasons to do it is actually what's more important, because the reason you're doing it is not because, I mean, there is a big part of it. A big part of why I love producing a podcast with Rye is because, yeah, it is for my community, but it's on my terms. It is based on what I want to produce, and you can take it or you can leave it. If you leave it, it's not for you, and that's totally fine. I can almost guarantee you, punch in something into Google and you'll find something that is more in line with your perspective. I am not in line with your perspective, so fine. If you pick up Marshall's book and it doesn't work for you, then fine. At least you read the fucking book. At least you read that.
Please.
Yeah. You know.
I just want to acknowledge, Marshall, like the vast amount of vulnerability it takes to put something out into the world like you have with this book. I mean,
Absolutely.
Doing something on Instagram is one thing, and that's not to belittle or demean, you know, what any of us do with our Instagram pages, but to channel your life's work and passion into into a book, like just this physical thing for others to read and to resonate with or not resonate with. At the end of the day, it's the fact that you created this, you birthed this creation that is a part of you, and it's making me think of like the Horcruxes from Harry Potter, right? Like you're gonna live on in this book with whoever has it for generations to come, and just the vast amount of vulnerability that it takes to do that, to create that. I just honor that and wanted to acknowledge that. Like I'm just very proud of your ability to have done that. And it's just and to go through that process of self-publishing too, like that's such, to me it's a terrifying thing. Like I feel just the way my mind works and process works, I kind of need like that external guidance and the critiques, and I would be personally terrified to self-publish because I'm just like overthinking every little minute detail of like, did I do this well enough, or like, is this going to be received well enough, you know? So just fully want to acknowledge that it is wonderful what you have created. I haven't yet finished it, but it's beautiful, and it's the first of its kind that I've ever seen of a grimoire steeped in storytelling and intertwined with magic. Like that's the first type of grimoire like that I've ever seen. So you've, as far as I know, you've created a one of a kind masterpiece that's unique, as well as just embodies, you know, you and your practice. And I think that's absolutely wonderful.
Well, thank you so much. That truly means the world to me. I'm so glad that I'm really, really glad that my vision for what I want to put out there is being seen. That's what I'm hearing from so many people, from you guys, is that people who read it are feeling seen, and it makes me feel like my vision for them to be seen is being seen. So that's really what I want to put out there is something that makes people who dive into my work feel like they are a part of it, and they can make it a part of their craft.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm so excited for them for this to bleed into other resources, to see this in, for this to be an inspiration for other folks to write their works, and God's willing, to see Marshall's book on someone else's works cited.
To imagine my book in someone else's bibliography, I mean, that is just like awe-inspiring, truly.
Yeah, and we're going to get into the book.
Yes,
We're going to get
we
into
will.
the book. We're going to get into the book towards the towards, you know, the later half of this episode. But I do want to. Well, first of all, hang on. Let's talk about Rye. Rye, how are you?
I'm good. I'm so like,
We didn't get a check in for you. Let's check in for you.
yeah, no, I'm mind boggled because even though I switched Wi-Fi and shit, I feel like there's still a lag, so the audio delay is throwing me off a bit. But I've had a wonderful day. It's a beautiful, beautiful sunny day in San Francisco today. And originally, it started off with my partner and I going to the laundromat to like knock out laundry first thing in the morning, but it was like flooding, and so we were like, oh well, fuck that, we're not staying here. So we decided to just go to a cafe around the street, and I had some really good coffee and a fantastic muffin, and then we ventured off to some couple of parks around the city that I've actually never been to all my life living out here, and we got to see some beautiful sights. We saw a blue jay, and it's been a fantastic morning. We still have to do laundry later, but and it's just it was a great segue into where I am right now with y'all, of just getting to enjoy nature and this beautiful weather, and now getting to sit with the both of you and talk about magic and Marshall's book. And so it's been a fantastic day, and it's going to continue to be one.
Oh, good. That's so good that you're spending time outside, because I haven't seen outside in days. Let me tell you something. I I think the last time, Rye, you and I spoke was last week. Did we record last week or the week before?
I think it was the week before. No, it was last week.
It
Yeah,
was last week.
Yeah, it
Okay.
was on the beginning of Ramadan.
Yeah. So listen, y'all. I got another job. I first of all, I'm a clinician. I work in healthcare, and I work 12 hours a day sometimes. And then I decided to get a third job because I'm just so silly. And I decided to try to become an editor for a content creator, and I got the job. Now I'm an editor for a content creator, and their content creator is a friend to all of us. They are Frankie, the chaotic witch aunt. I am now their video editor. So all of the last three, as of this recording, the last three videos that you've seen on Frankie's channel were mine. I edit those. They are incredible, if I do say so myself. But editing videos is very, 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 very time consuming, and I'm very busy all the time.
Yes.
And also I edit the videos for the podcast as well, for the video versions of the episodes. So I've been compiling all of I've been consolidating editing days. Like today is an editing day. As soon as we're done here, I'm going to be editing, and then tomorrow I'm also going to be editing. But also I have tomorrow is Palm Sunday as of this recording. So
Oh my God.
this week is going to be a very busy week for us because it's Holy Week. So it's leading into Easter. So I have this really huge ritual that I'm planning for Easter Sunday. And I haven't written it yet. I've started writing it. I haven't written it completely. So I'm working on that. I am supposed to be going to mass tomorrow morning. Um, there's a mass at 8 and there's a mass at 10. I don't know which one I'm going to yet. And then all day I'm editing, and then I'm writing my ritual down. And then someone commissioned me for a rosary, so I have to make a rosary. So
Girl.
I know. Listen, I'm not burnt out. I'm just really busy. I'm not overwhelmed. I'm just really busy. I'm planning everything out. The secret to not burning out, y'all, is not overloading yourself with work, obviously, but also staying organized. Stay organized as much as possible. I am a very organized person. It drives me crazy when I'm not, when things are scattered and all over the place. But I'm having a great time. Frankie is such a wonderful person to work with. They are so easy, and it's so much fun to have so much liberty in regards to editing those videos, because I'm having so much fun editing those videos. If y'all haven't seen the last couple of go watch their content, go watch all of their videos, but the last 3 are really fun. I put a lot of work into editing, really fun stuff. There's a lot of Jesus memes in it. It's really fun. So yeah, I've been really busy. So yeah, I haven't seen The Outside in quite a while. But I because of Holy Week coming up, I'm actually cutting down on my workload because I have a lot of magical work and devotional work to do this week. So I'm very excited for that. But yeah, okay. So Marshall, before we talk about your book, I just want to talk about you personally, and because we haven't had a chance to get to know you yet, or our listeners haven't gotten a chance to get to know you yet on our podcast. Let's just start from the beginning. Like how did you start? How did things start for you in regards to your practice? I know that you have talked about this about your practice and how it started on your podcast before. The Big Blue Book, everyone knows it.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, how did it start for you?
You know, I can remember an obsession with witches in any way, shape, or form since I was young enough to remember it at all. I even remember stealing my sister's Barbie dolls and making homemade little brooms and using my Weebelows or Cub Scouts handkerchief as a makeshift cape and hood, and then I would make my mom, it was always my mom, drive me around the neighborhood so I could stick it out the car window so I could make the witch fly. Like I was just obsessed with the iconography of the witch. Thank you. And it was one of those things that just as a archetype stuck with me in my psyche since I can remember. And it wasn't until I said, I don't know, 12ish, maybe 13 years old. I know it was in 6th grade. I remember that specifically. So whatever age that was. I discovered Buckland's complete book of mythology, complete book of witchcraft at a Books A Million in the department store mall. And it was one of those things where, you see something that I guess I always kind of believed was a fiction, right? Like it was something that I'd only been exposed to within fiction, and all of a sudden there was not only this one book, but I kept looking around a whole section on a religious aspect that I had no idea even existed. Mind you, I'm so young. I'm a white cis male in suburbia. I was not exposed to anything outside of what was put in front of me at that point in time. It was so eye-opening. I saved up weeks worth of lawnmower money to basically purchase it. I kept it hidden from my parents for a while. I ended up getting, once I came out to my parents as not as gay, but as wanting to practice this, Dad did not care. Mom was kind of wishy-washy, but she wanted to support my interests. So, that got into Silver Ravenwolf, and Scott Cunningham, and all the good ones. I still remember having a fun shopping day with my mom, and it was when Practical Magic. Oh my gosh, so that must have been 1998, 97. around that time period. It had just come out in Blockbuster.
I think so. I think you're right.
Yeah, 97, 98, it had just come out in Blockbuster, and I was so excited because I had just purchased To Ride a Silver Broomstick, and we had rented Practical Magic, and I literally laid on the couch and watched that movie 3 times on a loop while looking through the book. It was just one of those things that stuck with me as a really, really happy, absolutely passionate, overstimulated with witchery moment in my life, and it still sticks with me. I can still hear like the beginning of the movie starting as I flip through the pages. It was a passion of mine so quickly when I got into it. Unfortunately, it caused a lot of problems at school. Actually, I don't think I've actually told this story before. This will be a good one then.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I was in 6th grade, and I remember it got around the school. I mean, I was bringing these books to school. I was reading them in class, through class, you know. Apparently, some parents got really concerned about a witch at school and in suburbia. I mean, it was like one of those moments where I had no idea this was going on, but I remember being pulled out of class into this was in 6th grade, so this is young. I was told that there were 3 teachers, and as an adult, I know one of them now was gay, which is he was trying to protect me. He was sweet. But one of the head teacher, who was basically the teacher of that grade at the time, I remember her specifically saying, like, we've got a lot of concerned parents calling in. We have had a lot of scared students, and there's been a lot of talk of witchcraft and voodoo and you putting hexes on people. And I'm just like, I do practice witchcraft. I'm a Wiccan, but this has nothing to do. What do I do? I'm a scared 6th grader. I don't know how to respond to this. Do I lie?
Right.
Do I lie and say no, it's not true? When I literally have books in my bag that are about witchcraft.
Right. Right.
So, and I even remember like that one gay teacher. I remember the only reason I remember him specifically saying something that was kind was just like, I think this may be getting a little out of hand, like, because he was even the history teacher too, which is quite beautiful, because he brought up, like in Salem, this was kind of a hysterical thing, and they basically shut him up, which is indicative to that time period too, because it was 1998.
Yeah, that's interesting. The irony and all that.
The irony and all of that, exactly. And they basically told me, you need to shut it down. No more talk of voodoo or witchcraft. And I'm like, you can already hear the early 90s synchronization of all things that are totally separate, right? So they're saying these things to me, and I'm like, I am a child. What am I supposed to do to make this stop? Because they said, if this talk and discussion doesn't die down, we're going to have to call your parents. And that was really scary for me, because I was not in a healthy place yet with my parents around this subject matter. So that was how I did my first freezer spell. And I got it from Teen Witch by Silver Ravenwolf. And I remember I wrote the situation down specifically as stated. I put it in a little baggie. I put it under ice and water, and I put it in the freezer. And I want to say I remember it very specifically. Things died down very quickly. They never had to call my parents. We moved on. I went to 7th and 8th grade, still practicing witchcraft, still being a known Wiccan, I even remember reading some of these books for class projects in my 7th and 8th grade year. Like, I continued on. No one had it wasn't really a problem anymore. So that was my first spell I ever did. That was my childhood trauma and a nice little handbag, a very, very nice handbag, a clutch, if you will. And,
a clutch, yes.
A clutch. Unfortunately, as I got older, I continued to practice all the way through high school on my own. This is a time period, of course, when Wicca and witchcraft were still synonymous. All of the material that was coming out, at least in America, that made its way down to Texas, where I was living, was very, very Wicca-centric, very 90s Wicca-centric, very rule of 3. I did not know that witchcraft existed outside of the, and I'm using air quotes for people who can't see it, ancient religion of Wicca. Like,
right.
I was part of that movement who bought into a lot of this stuff that I was learning. And it wasn't until much later that I learned differently. And life kind of slapped me in the face in my late teens, early 20s. I moved out at 19. I got a full-time job. I kind of dropped a lot of spirituality and didn't pick up it again until I want to say like my late 20s. And what started out as getting back into finding a place within spirituality quickly dived into like a lot of new age stuff. Growing up, the books that were about witchcraft were right next to the books about New Age, right next to the books about Ascension, right next to the books about Sylvia Brown the Psychic. I mean, they were all, you know what I'm talking about. They were all.
No, it literally, I think it happens to a lot of us. It happened to me and Rye for sure.
It's
Mhm.
very
Yeah.
easy to synonymize these things. And so, unfortunately, that movement into it also got very, very deep into spiritual bypassing, very, very deep into
Right.
toxic positivity.
Mhm.
I deeply struggled, and I started deeply very much believing that everything that went wrong in my life was my fault, and I vibrated in that way that brought that and attracted it to my life. I even remember going to a couple really, and I even went to like a different channeling seminars. I went to an Abraham Hicks seminar. I went to a Theo seminar in LA for like a weekend, like multi-$1,000 trip. I was like, I've been listening to this person on audiobooks. I've been listening to them on their channel. I got to go see them. And I saw her, and I was not getting in person what I thought I was getting in these, mass-produced audiobooks and experiences. And it was one of those things that I kind of took a step back and I was like, am I holding on to this because I've been doing it for long enough that I feel like I don't know what life would be like without it? Or am I doing it because it's true, real, and work? I couldn't tell the difference anymore. And eventually got to the point that I was like, this is not healthy, I think, for me anymore. This isn't what I think I thought it what was getting into when I got started. I saw possibilities and opportunities and spiritual growth when I got started. I just saw doors slamming in my face by the time I started to leave, and it was a healthy decision to move away from that mindset. But the thing is I'm lucky enough to know that I've gone through this journey. I was open spiritually, and I kind of was like, I want to get back into the thing that made me happy. I thrived with witchcraft. I thrived with it, and I wanted to get back into it. So I started, just kind of getting back into some. I pre-purchased ebooks of the same thing that I used to purchase when I was younger to kind of refamiliarize myself. I got in a couple of online communities, Facebook. Oh God, the Facebook groups, man. That was my first exposure to Facebook groups. Was my first exposure to online witch stuff. It was very fascinating, and I was thrown back in after a whole decade of not being part of what never had been an online community for me in the first place into one. I was immediately exposed to some really big names that I didn't even know were big yet. I learned very, very quickly how witchcraft and Wicca had made itself publicly separate, and how different things were being embraced. I learned about the history of Jill Gardner. I learned about the history of the Law of Three and its actuality, how it came to be. I learned a lot more about the great lie of the Western witch cult of Europe. I mean, I learned a lot of these things that I'm so, so, so grateful. I probably didn't need to know when I was a teenager, because I feel like it would have been the ice water on my nice warm meal that I was deliciously enjoying. but now I'm an adult. I can make smart decisions. I can think rationally. I can do my own research. When I was younger, a lot of the books that I had to order from the back of the book I already had. Like Llewellyn had 3 or 4 different pages in black and white of the covers of the books they had, because you may not be able to find them in your local bookstore. So I was lucky enough to find some of the ones that I did, and now the whole world has seemed to open up to me. Like online communities, all of these different things for free on websites, on TikTok, on Twitter, groups, podcasts. I hadn't even gotten into podcasts at that point in time. I was still listening to true crime podcasts. The idea of myself even making a podcast was so far out there. I didn't even think that I'd be able to do something like that. And slowly, I really, really, not even slowly, horribly quickly, I deep dive back in. I didn't drown in it, because I just drunk it all in. Like that sea of information just became the big pregnant witchcraft belly of water in my stomach. Like I just was taking it all in as much as I could. I was fascinated. People were sharing their books of shadows online. That was still unheard of when I was younger. Like, you don't talk about that. That is not for other ears, especially eyes. I don't feel that way anymore, obviously, but
Mm-hmm.
it was just one of those things that I just felt this sense of freedom about it. I was very excited, and I slowly started building things like, little demonstrations on Witch Talk. I didn't have Twitter for like the first 2 years almost. I started making an Instagram with just like moving some of those videos over, because that was back when Trump was president and they were threatening to take TikTok away from us. So I had to have
Oh
something
yeah,
else.
I totally forgot about that.
This is the second time around. So,
Yeah.
right? So I wanted to make sure I had something to continue. And once I moved things over, I was like, ooh, I can write longer captions here.
Yeah.
I got so excited because it was the opportunity to use my words. And that was a time when I still wasn't using my face in any of my videos. So it was important to me that the work be the subject, not me. And that kind of came to a nice married section eventually, where I started putting myself in my videos, and I felt more comfortable with my face being out there, because I just didn't feel that way back then. I'm very, 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 very grateful for how quickly, and I will say this first off, I never ever ever started making content to become an influencer. It feels really, really weird. It'd be stupid to say I'm not. I know I am now, but it feels really weird to say that, because I'm still one of those people that makes fun of influencers. I think
Same.
we can do that. We can do
Yeah,
that.
we can do that because we are one.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. It's self-deprecation. What's better than that?
It's the best.
It's the best. So I never sought out to it, but I was so grateful for the amount of people that felt like my words resonated with them. They felt like, oh, we are all content creators in the witchy sphere online, right? We have seen disinformation, we've seen misinformation, we've seen good information, but told from an extremely militant standpoint that leaves no nuance, no discussion. I want that discussion. I want to see more people realize that people are arguing over a very gray issue with very black and white stances, and no room for anything in between. And I think that doesn't really exist in the majority of things. There are some, don't get me wrong, but I wanted to create a space where that nuance was discussed. It's important. There's a gray area. And I have been wrong on many things. I've admitted I've deleted old stuff that I no longer jive with, or I've edited it to say I no longer have these views, because I do think it's really, really wonderful that people not only get to grow themselves, but they get to see the people they follow who may have been instrumental or inspiring to them, to see them grow too.
Gosh, you've brought up so many topics and points, Marshall, that I want to respond to that would make this episode hours long.
I'm so sorry. I should have given more breaks.
No, but that just means that Marshall has to come back.
Yes, I'll be happy to come
exactly, for part two. No, you just shared so much that all resonated. That I think the thing that's most salient and sticking out for me from what you shared is that feeling of that full circle of coming back to what just feels right to you.
Yep.
And that sense of coming home, and how it just that sense of like that kind of gosh, I was reading in a book somewhere about how exile actually is an initiatory experience that actually brings you back to where you're supposed to be, or where you're supposed to be going. And so when you're sharing your experience of leaving Wicca and going through that New Age exile to then come back home to that Wiccan or witchcraft experience that just felt like, as you described it, that hot meal, which I love that metaphor. It just resonates so much for me, and I know probably Voga too, because we've shared our experiences of how we left our upbringing of religion to then to go into New Age, to then find witchcraft and folk magic, and how that just felt like our coming home experiences. So I resonate so deeply with what you're sharing, and God, you brought up so much, like the necessity of nuance and dialogues that are needed, and the issues that arise with online witchcraft communities, and just all of that. I just snaps for all of it. So thank you for everything that you just shared, because I'm just like, yes, I'm here for all of it.
Yeah, no, 100%. It to sound like one of those girls, it really resonated with me, because I mean, just echoing what Rai said in regards to exile being a form of initiation. This is something that I've talked about before, because an actual formal initiation exists, and they are important. Okay, especially when you're going into some sort of spiritual practice. They are important. I'm not saying that they aren't, but there are people who found their way into this craft or into this path because their life was an initiation. The way that things have happened, or the things that have been given to them because life is just life, is an initiation within itself. There are folks who found witchcraft after becoming homeless. There are people who found witchcraft because of a very toxic and abusive relationship. I mean, the spectrum is so broad as to how people find this practice and how they customize their practice for themselves. And most of it was because, I mean, when you talk about an initiation, something that initiates that practice it could be anything. It could be anything that could push you in that direction. There's a lot of people who their initiation into witchcraft was leaving the church.
Mhm.
That's that's something that a lot of people would probably relate with. My initiation was a little bit kind of topsy-turvy, where I had to deal with a lot of family trauma and religious trauma, where it kind of went back and forth, and I had to kind of deconstruct my idea of my faith and how my faith and my family weren't the same thing, and I had to kind of disconnect those two things at the same time. So your story of how you came into your practice, um and also how it's evolved and what you're doing with it, especially with what I talk about and what I advocate very heavily with, especially with the work that I do here in LA, is I cultivate community. That is the biggest thing that I feel like is so important in my craft and in a lot of crafts, and a lot of people's practice, is the sense of community, where even though you might practice by yourself, there are people who are practicing side by side with you, and being able to kind of volley off of each other, talk about each other's practices, and also diversify the practice. And also it also reduces the risk of misunderstanding, miscommunication, and misinformation. Being able to talk about, and thank God for social media, because it made it so much easier for us to connect. Because if it wasn't for social media, I probably wouldn't even know who Marshall was. This is when until the book came out, of course.
Well, if it weren't for social media, I probably wouldn't have been able to self-publish my book.
That's exactly right. And for it to be so successful, for people to actually have it in their hands, the sense of community and what you did with your practice is really admirable. And it's something that I think Rye and I, what we wanted to do with our podcast for this little niche group of magical practitioners, is we wanted to give them a voice too, and that's what you've done with the community, and that's what we continue to do with both of our podcasts, is to give people voices and to give people a platform to talk about these things, because some people, they don't have the freedom, they don't have the privilege to talk about them, they don't have the privilege to talk about the things that we're talking about today openly. And at least we're giving them a place where they can talk back to their phone or talk back to their computer and say, like, yes, that's how I feel. This is the experience that I'm having right now, and I know that someone has experienced it before, and this is how I navigate it so that I can make my life as easy as possible and try to get myself out of it, try to make myself better, make myself just more aware socially, just in general. So love that. Thank you for sharing that story and being vulnerable with us, because I had a base of, how your practice has started, because I told you I'm an avid listener to you and Austin. So thank you for sharing that story. I really, really appreciate it.
I'm happy to.
Yeah, Marshall, I want to ask I do have a question. I'm really curious where your practice is today. Do you have a label for it? Like, I know, I correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like you've identified it as traditional witchcraft before. And so I'm just curious to how your practice and your magic and your craft has evolved from where you were as a Wiccan years back to where it is now, and what that practice looks like, as well as how it has influenced your book. We can go into even more explicit detail in the book later on, but I definitely know the two intertwine. So I would love to know what your practice is, what it looks like, and how that influenced the creation of your book.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do identify mostly as a traditional witch. It's interesting that word itself seems to evoke a lot of different ideas in different people. And so for listeners, I really want to make it very, very clear. The word traditional witch sometimes comes with capital T and sometimes a lowercase t. And I'm talking about a lowercase t, specifically meaning that I practice a set of traditions within witchcraft, not the tradition, not a initiatory closed tradition like Clan of Tubal-Cain or a couple of these other ones that are focused very specifically on their own closed groups or titled historical, literally orally passed down traditions. But traditional witchcraft comes from a lot of British and European centric ideas around the folkloric devil, around inspirations from trial transcripts, from old practices by cunning folk, cunning men and women throughout history. It's a very, very loose amalgamation of traditions that have inspired a lineage, or more so inspired a craft. So I do follow this concept of like a folkloric devil and a witch queen, if you will. My practice, and I think I've said this before, but maybe some of the listeners haven't heard this on this show because they don't listen to mine, and they should, but whatever. I have evolved a lot from Wicca, which is a very, it was a solitary eclectic Wicca, right? It's very Scott Cunningham. It was very based off of what I was reading from these books and then duplicating and replicating in a practice. In my practice now, I find that it is much more inspired and made personal. So in books that you can read about traditional witchcraft, like Keldon's Crooked Path or Besim's and Sword, and somewhat you also see it in traditional witchcraft, the Book of Cornish Ways by Gemma Gary. You do see this idea of a folkloric devil and a witch queen or witch mother that seems to create a type of archetype, if you will, which some people, in my opinion, mistakenly compare a lot to the Lord and Lady from Wicca. But the Lord and Lady from Wicca is really about a representation of a type of fertility cycle and a type of creation pattern, if you will. And that may not be everyone's interpretation of it. That was the one that was presented to me through Scott Cunningham and through Raymond Buckland's version of Wicca at the time. The way that I see the folkloric devil and the witch queen or witch mother are very, very, very different, because I don't see them as this couple whatsoever. I actually see them as a part of differences in perspective and spectrum. So I see the folkloric devil as the physical initiator, the gatekeeper at the crossroads, the being in which I can go out and touch with the grass, touch with the dirt, stand in power at an actual crossroads, at a cemetery, at a liminal place. The stones, the water, the elements I work with, those all connect back to the physicality in my craft. I see the witch mother or witch queen as what I cannot see, what I cannot feel, what I cannot sense outside of my own second senses, or I should say sixth sense, whatever you want to call it, my second sight. The witch's purview. I see her, or them, because she is not female. It's just a very easy human way to kind of conceptualize it, as the non-physical. And you may have heard the terminology, the light between the horns, right? You hear that a lot in traditional witchcraft, the horns being the folkloric devil and the light being the gnosis that is presented to you through this figure. I see her as the gnosis. I see her as the light, the weaver of reality, the maker of star. I mean, I could go on and wax poetically about her forever. I have done this in the past with, she's the weaver of threads. She's the creator of fate. She is the flame of the stars that shine light upon us. It's the things you can't touch. She's the spark of magic. And I see this as a collection of physical and non-physical and everything that lies in between. And sometimes I have in the past kind of talked about the idea how it is somewhat modeled off of alchemy, with the divine masculine, divine feminine, divine androgyne, but I feel like that's a whole nother model that comes down to alchemical equations, which can be helpful but also can be a hindrance in certain practices and ideas about gender. So I try to actually kind of remove that from it. That's it's not important. These aren't human beings we're dealing with. We're dealing with ideas, we're dealing with concepts, we're dealing with spirits. I don't call them deities, I don't call them gods or goddesses. I think those names can be used, but I see them as figures and spirits that I am venerating, that I am honoring, that I'm working with on a contractual level. I did do a spirit. I did a type of call to the man in black that then, several weeks up, was followed by a personal dedication, an initiation in the woods, of course, at midnight under the full moon, obviously. And it was really one of those moments that I went out there, I did this I won't get into too much of the details, but I did this thing. I felt very much empowered. I felt very much close to that spirit of liminality, and I've been very, very grateful to experience the type of spirit interaction since. You asked what my practice looks like. That's a big part of it. I'm also an animist, so I see spirit in absolutely everything. When I'm working with herbs in my craft, I'm not working with rosemary and thyme and parsley and sage. Here I am, going to the Scarborough Fair, and like I'm not working with these things like they're a recipe going into some cookies or a pot of soup. They are spirits that I am working with. I wrote an article about that recently on the Southern Light Diaries on Patheos Pagan. A lot of times people look at spells like recipes. I look at them like spiritual contracts. The incense that I'm lighting is an offering to these spirits to work with me. The spirits within these herbs or these stones or this water or this earth, I'm honoring it. I'm giving it an offering of sometimes maybe something from me, maybe a bit of myself, maybe just some scent, like I said, from incense, maybe a chant, a prayer. I am giving it attention, so the spirit feels what I want, becomes one with my desire, and then goes out and enacts it in reality. I'm not just baking a cake. And I think that's a really big difference between the way that I saw it when I was younger versus how I see my practice now. I don't feel alone when I'm working at my altar or my workspace. I am obviously, in my opinion, surrounded by my spirit court when I call them in. And that's what I do. I usually call in these spirits. I have a very specific method of going about and maybe casting a spell or doing a working or communicating in a specific way. And then I will send them back out to, this sounds awful, but to do my bidding. And that's kind of the way it works. It's a contractual agreement. I have a once a month offering that I specifically make, that I promise to continue making. And I know that then I make a regular, smaller offering on a regular basis, usually every day. Sometimes incense, sometimes it's just a prayer that I wrote myself as a dedication. And it keeps me connected with these spirits. I think that's about it. It keeps me connected. It allows for me to have this ongoing relationship, just to make sure that it's not always a tit for tat. I don't like the idea of it always being a tit for tat. I am always giving veneration. I'm doing this daily thing. And in return, when I ask for something, my spirits are more than happy to help me achieve it.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, I mean, the whole tit for tat thing, I think, is unrealistic.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really expect. First of all, I think that there is a big aspect of what is warranted and what is not that we sometimes forget. Because at the same time, it's like we are so heavily conditioned in this time and space, especially here in the United States, where we believe that we're entitled to whatever we ask for, regardless of whether we do the work or not. Right? We just feel like we're entitled because we're human beings and we think that we're entitled to everything, either land or spaces or people or whatever. We're entitled to it all, right? Spirits don't work like that. Spirits get to choose what is warranted and what is not. No, this is not, you are not entitled to this, so I will not give it to you. Thank you for the work that you've done. Let's revisit this at another time, where I feel like maybe that time I'm going to feel like you deserve what you're asking for, or maybe it's warranted, or maybe it's just not the time. It's just bad timing on your part, because most of the time they just know better. But at the same time, I appreciate the whole aspect of how heavily influenced your practice is when it comes to spiritual work. That is something that I always try to advocate when it comes to practicing your craft effectively. The efficacy of your craft is how well you cultivate relationships with your spiritual court,
Oh yeah.
whatever that spiritual court is. And they get to dictate what that looks like. What they like and what they don't is up to them. You can't just give them whatever they want and expect things to happen, right? You have to, it's a trial and error kind of a thing, and you have to work constantly at doing that. Especially with the work that we do and the work that we talk about here on the podcast. Like, we have a cornucopia of spirits to work with that aren't even earth-based. They're all just heavenly based, right? They're all like in the sky. But even working with saints who are now heavenly spirits, we're earthly spirits. They knew what it felt like to be human. They relate to us on that human level. And that's kind of where my practice bleeds into more of the witchcraft aspect of my practice. I know I've in some cases had to not really defend my practice in regards to what it means to be a witch, but kind of just say what I have to say and what my praxis or what my belief system is, or what my I'm trying to find the word, cosmology, how it kind of blends together. Because like when I work with saints, and then when I work with local land spirits, when I do those things, like go out to the woods and talk to the spirits of the land, that's where it bleeds into each other, right? Because I do both. And I've spoke about this before, where my witchcraft and my devotional work, they're sometimes the same and sometimes they're separate. And I have to decide, I have to discern what is appropriate and what isn't, based on what I know about my spirits. And the only reason why I know what my spirits want is because I communicate very effectively with them. I can't bring some saints into the woods to talk to the devil. It doesn't work.
They're not interested.
They're not interested. And also, it's not even just like they're not going to smite you, but they'll ignore you. Like, what are you doing? Like, if you want to talk to me at your altar, all you need to do is pray to me, right? As opposed to like going out into the woods, just like, I need you to walk 3 times clockwise around a cauldron, around a fire, butt ass naked on a full moon. You know what I mean?
So it'd be like calling your hairstylist because you have a plumbing issue. No,
It's a perfect analogy.
What am I going to do?
That's the perfect analogy, because it's right. It's like, you have to, just because you see it in a book, just because you see it in just because there are parallels, because there are things that you see that look the same, doesn't necessarily mean they are the same. Mm-hmm. You have to sit with these spirits. This is actual spiritual communication. This is actual, like, sitting down and talking to your spirits is so important. And like what you said, like, the rosemary that you have in your hand is the vessel to the spirit. It is what is carrying that spirit. It's not the spirit itself. You have to commune with the spirit of rosemary to see what rosemary wants to do for you.
Well, I mean, like, in all of our oils, all of our lotions, all of our potions and incenses, when we are burning, when we're cooking, when we're extracting the spirit from the plant. We're extracting the spirit from that material plant directly into the water, directly into the oil, directly into ash that we're burning to release into the world. Like, it's a spirit. And I remember someone said this once, and they were like, essential oils are the extracted spirit from the plant that you want to work with. And I was just like, the extracted spirit. I was so moved by the language and verbiage. And I just love that, because that's true. When you make a potion, when you boil your tea, you are extracting the essence
Absolutely.
of what that plant material is. That's part of witchcraft.
There's this this is going to be really funny story that kind of goes into what you're talking about. I don't know if y'all remember Rachel Ray and how she used to have this TV show on Food Network called 30-Minute Meals, where she would have a 30-minute block where she would make an entire meal. And I used to watch it religiously. I loved Rachel. I loved the Food Network.
Rachel Ray.
Yeah, Rachel Ray was one of the girls. I loved her so much. And there's this thing that she would do sometimes with dried herbs, where she would put it in the palm of her hand. And one of her little tips to get more flavor out of the herbs is to rub it in your palm. And she said, I remember this in my head, especially going into like this practice where it really resonates with me now, where she said, like, you gotta rub it, you gotta rub these dry herbs. Okay, you gotta wake them up. You gotta wake up the spirit, right? And I was like, that's exactly
Mm-hmm.
what what it means to work with the herb, not just use the herb, but actually work with the spirit of the herb. Is when you're actively working with them, when you're waking it up, when you're making spirit work tactile. That is what witchcraft is. You're taking the spirits and bringing them into this tactile physical world and working with them to work together, and I know there's like, there's conversations about like working with spirits and working, blah 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 blah, whatever. Listen, you're working with spirits. They're working with you, whatever. I don't want to go into semantics as to classism and whatever. Listen, you're working with them, they're working with you. And when you do the work, that is what witchcraft is. You are actively communicating with spirits, you're communing with them, you are blurring the line between physical and spiritual, and that's the liminality that you work with. That's the space that you create for yourself.
I did this thing a while ago when I first really started diving deeper and deeper into animism and started applying this concept of spirit within everything to my apothecary. And I would, when I work with an herb before, instead of just dumping things into a bowl and doing what I want to do with them, I would put them in my hand first. And I would do that. I would kind of rub them around. I would release the aromatics. I would bring them up to my nose. I would take a really deep whiff without trying to, snort it. And I would really kind of take it into my senses. What does it smell like?
Mm-hmm.
What does it feel like in my hands? What color does it make when I swirl it and it breaks apart? What do I see in my mind's eye when I'm taking the scent of this into? I literally close my eyes, and there are many times, I know this is very much things that we do as people, as human beings, and I remember like seeing them as different. I think of them as like Calcifer from Howl's Moving Castle, the little like fire demon. And I would, so like, you're working with a green plant, it has intense aromatics, and I would see that as this little green flaming spirit in my mind's eye, and I could see its face, and I could give it a sense of profile in my perspective, in my mind. And it would be different for every single herb that I would work with. That profile would change, and it was clear to me because I was taking it in. And sometimes, if it's safe to even taste it, to really get all of your senses involved in the spirit of the plant you're working with. And I think that made it much easier for me to start really breaking down how I perceive these spirits, how I perceive these plants as telling me what it is. Is it spicy? Is it soothing? Is it cooling? Does it burn? Is it like too hot on my tongue?
Yeah, because that goes into what they're able to do for you.
Absolutely. The plant will tell me whether I'm smelling it, tasting it, seeing how it grows, watching the way in which it only blooms at night or only blooms during the day, or vines that will take over an entire yard and kill everything else in it, or ones that will shrink back if anything else get too close. Your plants will tell you how to work with them. You just have to pay attention. You have to put in the work.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that, Marshall. And so the second half of my question for you was, I want to know how this influenced your book. I mean, because as I mentioned previously, like your book is such a one of a kind in that it integrates the like magic of magic and creative storytelling. And I love.
Well, you asked me before about how I identify as a traditional witch or what exactly what it is. The only other one that I sometimes flounder with, and I use flounder lightly, also is folkloric, because I'm very, very inspired by folklore. That is a word that I think Aaron Oberon introduced to me, the author of Southern Cunning. And
An incredible practitioner, by the way. Go pick up that book. It's an incredible
incredible
book.
practitioner, seriously. If you don't follow Aaron Oberon, you absolutely should. They have amazing work out there. They're a wonderful writer. I'm so grateful to call them my friend. And they really introduced me to the idea of folklore being much more integrated into witchcraft than I think I had been introduced before. Then after that, I think I literally found Corey Thomas Hutchinson at the same time while listening to an interview on New World Witchery. That's Corey's podcast for listeners. Listening to an interview with Aaron Oberon. So it was this really kismety sort of thing where I was like, oh my God, I found some people. I found some of my people. And it was so inspiring to hear how stories inspired their craft. And as I started to expand a lot of my knowledge where I was pulling from, I really, really graduated hardcore from some of the things that I was getting my resources from when I was younger, like Cunningham, Ravenwolf, and Buckland, and started to grasp out a little bit more. I got into more, like I said, more traditional craft, more historical craft, getting into witch trials, historical witch sabbaths, the trial records around witch sabbaths, and even more so, I really, really enjoyed looking at a lot of grimoires and work that has been replicated from a lot of cunning folk over in England and Europe, and I know several of the books that really stood out to me were some of these grimoires that really, really made me just like, this is can we swear on here? I can't remember. Are we explicit or no? Yes. Okay, good. This is a fucking
Say all the fucking words.
This is a fucking book of magic, and I loved it. But many of them did not fit my cosmology. So, like, I'm a huge fan of symbols, sigils, working with seals, and I mean, these are literally names of spirits that you're working with, right? So, I'm a huge fan of like the Keys of Solomon, the Black Pullet, some of these other ones. I really like the grimoire The Long Lost Friend, which doesn't have much symbols, but it goes to what I'm talking about here. The problem with much of it, though, was that like I said, it didn't fit
The Long Lost Friend is that the powwow?
Yes,
that's powwow, right?
Yeah, it's Brook. I always forget how to say it. Brook High. It's the Dutch
Yeah.
Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm.
I've been trying to get my hands on that book because I really want to try. Anyways,
there's a really, really cute one by Troy Books. It's like pocket size. It's super cute. It's like little and green.
Oh, I'm gonna pick that up. Thank you.
Wish I could go on a tangent on that one because I did learn recently that even that book itself was written by a non-practitioner who collected examples of things that he was interviewing from different healers and practitioners in Dutch Pennsylvania. So even that book isn't written by and produced by a practitioner. It's from the outside perspective. So something to know before diving into that one. But these old grimoires, they were very, very much into the Christian perspective. No offense. But no offense. It's not mine. And I loved them, but many of them involved deep devotion to God and to Jesus and invocations to a lot of biblical ideas. And while that might be wonderful for many practitioners, for me personally, it wasn't my cup of tea. So have you ever read The Black Pullet by chance?
I have not.
It's this really fascinating little story, and that's what it is. It is a story about a man who finds himself being traveling, and it's been a long time since I read it, so the beginning is a little fuzzy, but basically he gets helped after an accident by a magician who secrets him away inside a mountain where he lives the life of a sorcerer. And he has no children and decides while he's recuperating, he has no apprentice, no child, no one to pass down this information, and decides to teach him while he's recuperating. In the process, this book delivers a bunch of seals, rings to wear, and words to say while working with these seals to achieve your ends. So it's literally a book of talismans. And I loved that it was telling a story to get to the point about what it was teaching. And that was my first exposure to understanding the art of telling a story to teach a magical practice. And I loved this concept. But a lot of the things that were in there were really, I mean, this is one of those Bibliothèque Blue French grimoires that came out around, I want to say, the 1700s. Maybe early 1800s. I can't remember to be sure, so don't quote me on that. But a lot of the things in which they were saying, like, do this seal, wear this ring, say these words, and 3 servants will pop up out of the air and they will bring you grapes, wine, and bread and cheese. And I was like, that's cool. They're not showing up. I know that. Like, I know this. So I wanted to create. Yeah, we know this as much as I would like that. I wanted to build upon this concept, and because I was so inspired by folklore, teaching stories and tales, teaching magical acts or inspiring them, I wanted to kind of build on something of that. And there's been multiple other books since then where like the first half is teaching you and the last half is rites. So I wanted to kind of put this whole collection, this compendium together of stories and narratives and tales, or just parables, because some of them really have no point except for the act of teaching you something. Some of them have entire stories and cosmologies built in within. And I wanted to create something that pulled in the reader and put them in the viewpoint of either the actual witch practitioner or the person receiving the help from the practitioner. And I wanted the reader to feel like they were sucked into these stories and immersed into these characters, because many of them are things that I have maybe experienced myself. Some of them are reminiscent about things that are happening right now. There's a story called Witch Bottles, and it goes into I don't want to give too much away about that one specifically, but there is a moment where the town kind of turn on a couple because they are in a non-conforming relationship, and one of the things they say is we have to protect the children. And we are going through a very visceral, very real, like I'm not just making up cliches. This is happening now. And I wanted a lot of the things that we as queer people are experiencing to be something that was in our actual material, because many of the types of old fairy tales and stories are things that have, I don't want to say all of them are outdated, because a lot of these themes can be timeless, right? But some of them feel so far removed, like princesses and princes and different types of adventures that they're not things that are happening right now. I wanted to take these stories and deliver them in a way that felt so applicable to the way in which many of us are feeling oppressed, feeling taken advantage of, feeling marginalized, feeling disempowered, and find that place of power. And I really, really loved that no matter how it came, because it didn't always come in the way in which one might think, these characters were empowered again. They found their sense of power, and you got to be a part of that story with them, and then take it into your own practice. So that was why I ended up writing the book the way I did. It was important to me to make sure there are hundreds, if not thousands, of 101 witchcraft books out there that will regurgitate the same information over and over and over again, and everyone needs a good baseline. But I wanted something that made people feel, I feel seen in this book.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I'm going to put a little bit of a Christian context into this, because this is what we do here. Y'all, let me tell you something. Once, I'm not going to give too much away, and this is not hyperbole. This is an extraordinary book. And the reason why I'm saying this is because when you look at grimoires, and you look at, there are grimoires that are grimoires, and there are grimoires that are cookbooks. And there's nothing wrong with a cookbook. There's nothing. It teaches you how to do something, and you get something out of it, right? But there is something about this book that really hits close to home. And the reason why I'm saying that is because, one, it feels like someone is telling me a story. It doesn't feel like someone is trying to explain a story to me or explain why something is happening to me. Someone is telling me a story, and it's up to me to figure out why they're telling me this story. Reading this book, when y'all actually get to pick up this book and read it, it feels like someone is telling you a story. And when we compare something like this, something that's full of tales and stories, and you compare it to something like the Bible, that is also a book of tales and stories. And what are those tales and stories trying to teach you? They're trying to teach you lessons. And when people write these things down, when people write their accounts down, especially back then, it is a way to explain how the world works, right? It's a way to explain how things in our world works in our favor and not in our favor, and also how to navigate those things, right? There's always a lesson to be learned in stories that are being told. And that's what the Bible does for some people. That's what grimoires do for other people. And also, um, there's a certain I'm just gonna this is I think it's a really good time for us to actually mention it. You wrote a book once, and
I did.
and the book is called um, Cunning Words, a Grimoire of Tales and Magic. Um, and it's absolutely beautiful. The simplicity of the actual the cover itself. I have the hardcover version of it. It is absolutely stunning. And it is also filled with Marshall's own artwork, I understand, right? Yes. It is absolutely beautiful. I don't want to give off way too. It's already been victimized to my annotations.
Victim away. That's yours. Make it yours.
Yes, but yes, it is a beautiful book, and it is absolutely the artwork in it is stunning. The writing is stunning, and like I said, you mentioned at the beginning of this episode that you were worried about people feeling like this is amateurish. This is not something, this is not a scholarly work. This is someone who's telling you stories, and that's why it feels like that. Someone who literally is, it is structured like someone is telling you a story. This feels like Tales of the Beetle and the Bard, like from Harry Potter. Like it's like it feels like a storybook where someone, I would take this book and read this at bedtime to like a child. I mean, to my child, I would if I had one. Like I would read this.
Careful
This
with
is a
chapter 3.
yeah. And that's the reason why witches can fly, and that's what I'm that it feels so personal, and it feels so folky. It feels so like the stories that were told around a campfire to teach kids about the boogeyman, or to teach kids about anything about righteousness, or about, and that's how the stories in the Bible were started. Like, it was all word of mouth. It was through sermons and teachings and people listening to the stories of man. And it's a way of explaining how the world works. This is just another way of explaining how the world works, and it is a beautiful, beautiful book. And I think that's a really good way of segueing into the book itself. So maybe it's time for us to talk about the book.
Let's do it.
There have I read this book. I'm almost going to be on my second reading of this book. It is structured in 3 parts, I understand.
Mm-hmm.
And the first part of this book are the actual tales, the stories that go into it, and they all have this. They have this interesting. I don't know if y'all know what I'm talking about when I say this, but they have like this interesting like Valentine's Day or like Love Actually feel to it, where like characters kind of peek into each story.
Yeah.
Like you have like archetypes that are kind of related to each other in each story, where you see different characters from other stories kind of peek into it. So I really appreciated that, because like you like everything, like a character from a different story isn't like a central part of that story, but they're involved in that story in some way. Like they're it just kind of comes together in some way. And I understand that. I listened to your most recent episode of Southern Ramble, and you encourage people to read this in order,
Yes.
to read it from cover to cover. So, and I understand why, because that's exactly how I did it, and it makes a lot of sense, even though it has like this like Into the Woods kind of a thing, where there's all these characters at the same time kind of intermingling in some way.
Yeah.
And the story comes together because of it. So it's a really I love the structure that you went into writing this book. Some of the stories that really stood out to me, just to let you know, Our Mother in Red brought me to tears. I was very emotional when I read that story.
It brought me to tears writing it. Like, the fact that I know people are reading it and feeling seen, I get really emotional talking about it. So if I get misty, you'll have to forgive me. It was one of those stories that I just felt. I struggled a lot growing up with my own sense of identity, my own gender, my own understanding about what my queerness meant. Before I'd even understood it, I remember looking at videos that my mom took to taking me in the summer to. My whole family used to do this like blackberry picking thing, and I remember they took a video of me with towel on my head and walking like really swishy. And I remember watching that video while remembering what was in my mind while it was being taken, which I didn't know was being taken. And I used to do this thing where I would go out in the wilderness when I thought I was alone, and I would pretend to be a pretty girl and that all the flowers were talking about how pretty I was. And I know that seems silly, but that was my childish mind really finding a very, very private place to be playful about things that scared the shit out of me before I even understood why I was scared. And I never got the opportunity to read a story that gave respect and love and celebration of having those feelings. And I wanted to write something that not only celebrated that, but also gave the freedom to go through it without the hardships that I know so many people who are trans, non-binary, and struggling to figure out their identity. I know there are a lot of questioning people out there who don't even know what they're questioning at different ages. And I wanted to have a story that didn't dive too deep into the pain of that, but more into the acceptance and the respect and the joy of it. I've never read a story like that before, and I wanted to put it out there.
That story was so impactful because it felt like I was reading a story about myself. It felt, and without giving out too, like, I don't want to spoil too much because I want folks to go and read the book, but also particularly pay attention specifically to that story, because that story does have a very, very important conversation that we talk about all the time here. We talk about, or just not here, but like just on the online space all the time, in regards to coming to terms with who you truly are and presenting yourself in the most authentic way. This just puts a magical spin on it. It puts a mystical spin on it, which is always very, very enlightening, and it's also really entertaining, because the way I saw it in my head was, I saw it in my head as an anime for some reason. Like I really saw it as like Spirited Away.
I love
Spirited.
that.
Yeah, like Spirited Away was popping into my head when I was reading that story. Like that's how I saw it in my head, and it was absolutely beautiful.
That's such a compliment.
It really is. The way that you described it, the imagery that you described in that particular in all of your stories really, but that particular story really brought me, like, the part where, like I said, without putting too much, giving out too much, the whole thing where there was nothing but a meadow, but like red plume of smoke, like that really, I was like, oh, this feels like a movie. It really feels like a magical movie that I'm watching. It's a stunning book.
There is one thing I do want to point out about that you just said that, and this won't give anything away because it's right in the beginning, the very, very beginning, and people will miss it if you're not looking closely. So you'll notice I have a map in the very beginning of the book that helps the readers kind of lay out a landscape about where everything is taking place. And one thing that you may notice if you look closely is there is no house for Our Mother in Red.
Oh my god, you sneaky slut.
Sneaky snake. Yes, she's meant to pop up when she's needed, and there is no specific place because she's needed in a lot of places. I think I said this in in the episode in our podcast. I likened her to the fairy godmother I wish I had the opportunity to have. And she does that in multiple stories. She kind of just pops up in places when she's needed most. And I think that was, no, I don't think I know because I wrote it. I don't know why I said that. I wrote it in a way that I wanted it to be the visage of the charmer. Not, yes, she's a witch, obviously, but not the typical dressed in black witch in the woods, but a charmer, someone who might be there to help, someone with a little bit too much knowledge, someone who lives on the fringes, someone who you would only go to when the mundane has failed you. and I wanted that visage to be there. And it's interesting, actually. I think even Austin said something recently about like the red path of the witch, and I was just like, that's a really good way to put it, the red path. And I wanted her to have a most fantastical, well, not actually, no, some of them have more fantastical stories now that I think about it, but I did want her to kind of be slightly otherworldly, mostly because as an archetype, she is a spirit, and she's a spirit that you can work with within my book.
Well, that idea of the spirit, that kind of spirit, it bleeds into a lot of spiritualities. Okay, because the reason why that hits so hard for me is because she reminds me of Mary. Because
Absolutely.
in the story, there is a gift that our mother in red gives to a character, and that gift is bravery. And I talked about this in our Marian devotion episode, the revisited one that we recorded, that's out now. That's something that Mary gave me. She gave me the courage to present the way that I wanted to present. And I know that Rye has the same kind of feelings in regards to Mary. Is she shows up when you need her.
Mm-hmm.
She shows up. She is that mother in red where I'm always paying attention to you. Even though I'm not sitting next to you, I am paying attention to you, and I will show up when you need me. I'm just waiting for that moment to happen. And that's the reason why she really had me at she really gripping my heart when I was reading that story. Is an absolutely stunning story.
Well, thank you.
Going more into the structure of the book, I know that it's divided into 3 parts. I know that there's more of like a section of the book that's more like poetry, right? Kind of telling stories in the same way, but and then also towards the end we have more of like the more practical stuff, the more things that you can do yourself, like I would venture to guess that these are things that are coming straight out of your own Book of Shadows. Is that true? Is that like the I know that everything was written by you, but the influence that the practical side of the book itself, what influenced that part?
Yes, many of those spells, some of those spells were already in my own personal grimoire, my own personal Book of Shadows. Some of them were inspired by writing the stories themselves. There were multiple times where I would try to extract a spell from a story and be like, no, that's wrong. And I would take that very much as I am being told by the spirits within my story, that's not the way it goes, that's not the right way it goes, and I would write it till I got it right. So it felt like I was being told this is the right way to go. Many of them are extremely sympathetic. They're based on sympathetic magic. They're based on the concept of... they're based on the concept that they are a lot of times things you might have seen from these stories or inspired by these stories. So like there's I have the three stories, Our Mother in Red, Our Mother in Green, Our Mother in Black, and in the back part of that section there's a whole chapter called the Red Book, the Green Book, and the Black Book. And it's done this way because some of the spells that are in there are rites that you can do are very clearly seen in the stories. And some of them are there because they're the magic that you can expect the Red Mother to be doing that would have been in her book. Because a lot of times, in every one of these stories, I think I mentioned at one point, a book of rites, a book of herbal healing, a book of spells, a book of something. And what you're getting in the back is that book that I'm describing. So you get to see all their magic, you get to see all their spells, you get to see all the things Our Mother in Green does to heal with herbs and plants. You get to see all the things that are written down in Our Mother in Black's Book of Curses. You get to see all the things that Belinda gets to have within her little book. So you get a much clearer and more expanded viewpoint of things that you may not have gotten fully within the story that continue on and forward. And I did this in a way, you know how I mentioned earlier about some of those grimoires like the Keys of Solomon, whatnot. Like these are the Keys of Solomon, or the greater Key of Solomon. It's a testimony followed by invocations, followed by seals that you can use with those invocations. So you get this sequence of information to teach you how to use the magic that's at the very, very end. And so I wanted the stories and the poems to set you up with an entire court of spirits that any of the reader could move forward on, and then understand how to work with the back, the magic in the back. So I kind of lined it up that way to give you the opportunity to, I guess, understand where these spells came from. Because a lot of times, spells as sympathetic magic, a lot of times, if I don't have anything at hand or I need to do something quick, I know a lot of my virtues in my head. I know the spirits that I can call to work with if I need to, with certain things that I may have on hand. Many times I will do a bit of sympathetic magic that is unplanned, because I know like responds to like, microcosm affects macrocosm, and a lot of these spells you can see do exactly that. And they even go a little bit deeper into the narrative themselves. You can see they pull in the green mother, the red mother. They pull in these characters, these spirits, and they tell a little story within the rhyme you might be saying. They tell a little story within the scroll you might write and put in that amulet or charm bag. And I wanted a type of magic that was clear where it was coming from, but also felt individual, completely new, and something that wouldn't be already in almost every single other 101 book of magic.
This may be presumptuous to say,
Really, say it.
but I tend to be very presumptuous. I mean, you've produced a work that has modernized where magic came from. So
I can say that.
So this is truly a testament to the foundations of witchcraft. The foundations of witchcraft is the people and what the people said. So
The people and what the people said. That's so beautifully put.
oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
No, it's simple. It's so beautifully put. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, and this is the reason why I'm so elated about this book, and the reason why, like, I was excited for the book, but when I read the book is it really is a true it is a staple. It is a staple. It's going to be a staple in my practice. It is a staple in storytelling, but it also socially and magically and historically, it is a testament to why we practice witchcraft. And the reason why we practice witchcraft is because of the people that we or how we practice witchcraft is from the people that we learned it from the stories that they told and from the lives that they lived. And you've kind of brought it into today, into what it looks like today through your own lens. And I hope this implores people to see their practice the same way, to see that their lives isn't just their lives to live, but it is a story to tell. So start writing those stories down. Start telling those stories, because those stories will inspire someone else to do the same.
I'm very inspired by art. I'm inspired by things that I see within nature. I remember, but when I was writing this, I remember one of the things was I was inspired. I didn't actually end up writing this one because it was a poem that I kind of stepped away from for a while. But like there was one where I was like, I want to write a poem about three sisters, and the three sisters were going to be personified plants. And then I was going to write around the fact that these three plants can work together or are separated, and how they have specific virtues that can work together, but because they were separated, and the story brings them back together. And it was this concept of how we can see the spirit within the plants that we're working with, and we can turn those into parables. And in the process of doing that, I started thinking a lot more about parables. And you brought up modernizing witchcraft, and so one of the parables that I absolutely loved writing was the Seven Holy Siblings.
Yeah, I was about to. Yeah,
it was a really, really cool story to put. I mean, it's not. I wouldn't even call it a story. I'd call it a parable, because it personifies the days of the week. It allows the practitioner to kind of have a fun way of seeing the days of the week and their planetary correspondences as priests, as lords or ladies, or sentinels of their temple that you could beseech, that you could call upon, that you could bring down into a talisman, into a amulet to carry, and the same way you would have in ancient years working with, say, like Agrippa, or working with the Picatrix, or working even sometimes with the Greater Key of Solomon with planetary talismans. I did want to modernize that, and I wanted to bring it into a place that I think would work for the folk, because it does have a very folksy way of teaching that. Now, I have a question for you, and I'm curious. You may have an opinion about it, you may not have it all. What did you think of the preface? Do you remember very much about it by chance?
The preface of, hang on. Are you talking about at the beginning of the book?
Yes. The very beginning with oh my gosh, now I'm blanking my own book. With absence, existence, physicality, and desire.
I literally, right when you said that, my eyes went to existence split into new forms, and desire gave birth to physicality. World spun and danced through the absence, singing to life.
Yes.
Is that what you're talking
This
about?
is exactly what I'm talking about. I wrote that so early on and got to a point. So for readers, I'm going to deeply suggest you read the preface when you get the book several times, because it's one of those things that makes you go, at first I'm not sure what I'm reading, and then when I was writing this, I felt very inspired to create an extremely baseline cosmology that hopefully, I believe, almost anyone of any belief system or faith could kind of look at. But I really, really wanted to create something that gave the visage to the old ones. I think we see the old ones in a lot of traditional witchcraft a lot, and people wonder, like, well, who are the old ones? Where do the old ones come from? What is this concept? And some people will say, oh, it's the witch's devil, or we just use this instead, or it's the god and the goddess, or it's the witch king and witch queen. I really, really wanted to give a very, very artistic and esoteric explanation of who and what the old ones are that we're working with when we call the old ones down into our practice. And so I really kind of got to the baseline of what the old ones are.
Yes, and the way that you actually wrote this preface, everything, desire, physicality, absence, they are existence, they are capitalized to suggest that they are personified and
Mhm.
they're spirits. So I didn't notice that until you mentioned that. So thank you very much for bringing that up. I'm gonna actually be looking at this. It's really, really interesting to see this, because I see it through a different lens now. That's absolutely beautiful. Absence, existence, desire, and physicality saw what they created, and for the first time, intelligent beings saw the old ones. Stunning. Stunning writing. Absolutely stunning writing.
And for a lot of people who have a lot of religious views, I wanted them to be able to tap into these stories, whatever your religious views are, because there are practitioners around the world under lots of different belief systems. And I wanted them to feel like you don't have to leave your deities, your gods, your goddesses, your spirits behind to work with this book, but you can possibly involve a new perspective of ones that maybe exist, maybe you want to work with, maybe you don't. And to be perfectly honest, the preface itself is slightly removed from the rest of the book, except for a couple different places. And I wanted that to be on purpose, because, to be perfectly honest, and if you go back and reread it, it's kind of an esoteric rewriting of the Big Bang. I remember reading this study, and it was the theory that the Big Bang itself was literally the first black hole that popped open into this universe, bringing forth an expansion that continued on, right? Matter entering a pocket of non-existence. So existence came into the absence, and from then on, the rest is history. Desire brought forward movements into the stars, and the earth spurned, matter split up into liquid gas and liquid gas and
Solid.
So there we go. Thank you. And this is how our universe slowly,
Yeah,
theologically, scientifically came to be. And I wanted to
absolutely.
really personify the spirited archetype of these existences.
Well, if we go back to the reason why people tell stories is because telling stories is the way that people it helps people explain how the world works. It helps
Absolutely.
explain nature. You know, before science was a science, before science was a thing, we had magic. Magic is the explanation of nature. It is explaining nature in a way that is tangible. And then science happened. And then, you know, really science is just magic with numbers. So, you know, that's the reason why we tell these stories, is to explain. And that's the reason why spirituality in every aspect of the word, religion, or it's a man's way of explain, not man's, but humankind's way of explaining how the world works, how nature works. And this is the reason why we tell these stories. So, you know, your Big Bang, your Genesis, your preface is your Genesis.
It totally
This is
is.
your Bible, and your preface is your Genesis.
It is. It really is. And that almost didn't make it into the book at all in the first place. I was like, maybe this is too removed. Maybe this is too religious. I don't know. And the further I got into the book, the more I realized, oh, this has to be part of it.
Oh no, it's stunning.
It literally, it was very clear to me. In fact, I almost wanted to call it, like the preface
In the beginning.
I almost did. It almost started with in the beginning. It was like, no, that's too cliche. I can't do that. But it was going to be the preface to the preface, because I wanted to be very clear that this is a esoteric explanation of how all of time began into this universe. And the stories don't really go that far back in time. So you'll notice in a couple different places there are characters that might say, they might say like, buy the old ones, dearie, because it's supposed to be clear that this ideology has slowly been funneled into the people who are the practitioners within the stories. The thing is it's just so subtle. It's almost like a backdrop. But later on in the grimoire section of the book, it gives you the opportunity to work magic, to work with these figures, work with these spirits and archetypes, so you can have the ability to kind of tap into them, if you will.
First of all, thank you so very, very much, you darling woman on the go, Marshall, for being with us today. I really, really appreciate it. This really is a full circle moment for personally for me. Thank you so much for being on our platform. I really, really appreciate it. Go pick up the book. It is absolutely stunning. It is, like I said, just for the sake of reading just a really well written book of tales and folklore. It is absolutely beautiful. Before we do our plugs and our names and our Instagrams and all that, I just want to go ahead and talk to our patrons really quick. Really quick. We have a new patron for our Archangels tier, Miss Mon. Thank you so much for joining the coven. We really appreciate your support. And our top patrons for this episode is going to be Martin VJ of Seraphim, of our Seraphim tier, Kaylee Rains of our Seraphim tier, and Kobe Koff of our Seraphim tier. Thank you so much for your support. We really, really appreciate you. Everything that your support means that we get to publish this podcast, this platform that we have, that we love so much dearly, and it also goes into Rise in Our Lifestyle. The money goes a long way, so thank you so much for your support. We really, really appreciate it. But yeah, if you are listening to this right now, I encourage anyone to join the Patreon, where we release early access video episodes of our episodes about a week in advance, and you get to see these beautiful faces. Everyone pose. There we go. As well as bonus episodes and blog posts that we write periodically when we feel inspired. And also for the top tier, you receive Rise personal tarot readings, as well as artwork that I periodically release. I think that's it. So please join the Patreon if you feel inclined to do so and become a member of the coven. With that said, Marshall, where can we find you? What is all the things? Where can we get the book? All of that stuff.
Okay, so first you have to call the court. I'm just kidding. You can find you can find me on
I
Instagram.
said call, not conjure.
I know, right? You can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Witch of Southern Light. You can find me on Twitter at MarshallWSL. If you'd like to buy my book, Cunning Words, A Grimoire of Tales and Magic, I am self-published on Amazon. It's direct print order, so the moment you order it, it will be printed and mailed to you, hopefully within about 2 to 4 days, depending on where you are. You most likely at this point will not find it in stores or retail just yet because I am self-published and it's published through Amazon. Hopefully soon I will have a copy into stores within the next month or so. If you'd like to buy my art, I do sell my art on all merchandise at my Redbubble shop. I have my own Patreon. I have my own podcast with Austin, Banex Bramble on Instagram called, what is it called? I've said cunning and crooked so many times, I have no idea. Yes, a podcast, Southern Bramble, a podcast of crooked
Podcast
ways.
of crooked ways.
We're on season 3. It's been 3 years, okay? Yes, Southern Bramble, a podcast of crooked ways on pretty much all streaming platforms. And yeah, I think that's it. That's me.
And with that said, my name is Voga. I am Voga Illumiscente on Instagram.
And I'm Marshall, also the Witch of Southern Light on Instagram.
And we will see you at our next Unholy Communion.